Welcome back. We're gonna take the dashboard out of this 1989 Nissan 300ZX, the Z31 model, and check to see why the speedometer is not working. I already took apart the speedo sensor. This is the electronically digital version of it. Previous models are cable driven. This one, it does send an electrical signal to the speedometer. So we're gonna take that speedometer out and see if we can fix it. Now I did cheat a little bit, looked up a video on removing this dash. It seems a little bit crazy, so I think there's a lot we have to do. Take off the steering wheel, take off the lower part, take off these buttons, and I think we'll be able to get it out without taking off anything on the steering column. So let's see how it works. All right, what we're gonna do real quick, now that everything's out, we're gonna verify the two wires involved in this circuit. We have a red and white and a black, and they're right next to each other on this far left driver's side. The bottom two wires on the top right, see right there? If you're looking at it from behind, it's the bottom two left. We have the black right here and the red and white. The red and white comes directly from the sensor being the power supply, and the black should go straight to body chassis ground. I'm gonna first check that body chassis ground real quick. Let's see what it says for us. I'll get a connection onto the ground, multimeter, continuity test to the black. We are good. Now I need to make sure that the red with the white stripe wire on here is actually connected to the sensor. So I'm gonna lift up the end of the car and unplug the sensor and run a jumper cable up here and see if I have connection. Basically, without cutting the wire, impossible to test if there's any breaks in that, but we were right there. So here is our wires and our plug, which is actually red and white and black. So I can unplug that and test from there. Oh, I think you just lift up on that tab. There we go. All right, so we got, I'm gonna put this to the side so it, right here, probe that red and white, connect my jumper cable to it, and we're gonna go back in the car, check continuity. And the other lead attached to red and white right here. So I'm gonna put this down real quick. Put it on test mode. Red and white is the second one right here. And we've got connection. Now the next step we're gonna do is test to see if the speedometer is actually putting out voltage through all this. So I'm gonna plug it back in, and I'm gonna attach my cables to these, to the black and the red and white, and then I'm switching this to AC voltage, and it's gonna read about 0.5 volts RMS. It will be necessary to start the car and put it in gear with the rear wheels off so that the speedometer actually turns. Alternatively, you can take the speedometer out and turn it by hand, but you have to do it fairly quickly. And for this, you can't have the e-brake on. Now double check, make sure wheels are off the ground, you got good jacks under it, and then e-brake is off. Now we'll watch, see if this is outputting the right voltage. Can you see that? Yeah, you can see that. Put it in drive, let off, and we're getting nothing. Neutral, it's stuck at 10 millivolts. drive. Why is this? Yeah, it's going to, it's about 0.05 volts. Yeah, I mean, it gets up to 0.1 volt. I'm gonna go double check the factory service manual. All right, we're gonna change this test up a little bit, and we're gonna test directly at the gauge, our sensor plug. I'm gonna take this wire, connect these two directly to the voltmeter. All right, with those connected, make sure they're not touching anything. We are on that. I guess the backlight doesn't work. You'll be able to read that. Now I did check it by hand, the way that it said to test it on the factory service manual, spinning it quickly, and I don't really know how fast it's spinning on the output shaft. It could be turning very slow. It is giving us a voltage reading, so I'm going to look up to see if anyone has any test voltages on that output when it's in gear. I'm thinking it's actually good. What I'm gonna wanna do next though is I'd like to get I think I can get like a AC motor, hook it up directly to the gauge cluster, right where the speed sensor goes, turn that by hand and see if that makes the needle move. And if that doesn't, then it's giving me a clue as to it being an issue in the actual speedometer itself. Because we have ground, we have what we think is good power supply from the sensor. So the last thing we're going to be checking is the actual gauge cluster. So let me see if I can find a motor that'll give me a good 0.5 volt output. Oh man, someone's been in here already. Half the screws are missing. But what we're going to do is open this up and trace the wires back, see if, once we open it up, we'll see where these wires are going. I mean, this looks pretty old, but it looks like it should be working. And there's black plastic tabs you got to push through, separate the body from it. Then we got the bare gauge cluster. Usually these pop out, straight out. So you gotta take off the needles. Then unscrew these tiny screws, 4 in the center. Now is a great opportunity to be able to clean or change your gauges. I'm gonna guess 99% of you guys don't want to change your gauges. Just clean them because they are dirty. Looks like it wants to take the temp sensor with it too, so we're gonna take off those screws. So this should separate. There we go. All right. No need to take off that temp sensor yet. So we've got, yeah, oddly enough, temp sensor needs to come off. So you're going to use a little plastic trim separator tool. There you go. Now take out the lens. And we're inside. So based on the gauges, this is our speedometer right here. This plug right here on the back of this is likely everything for the speedometer. I'm going to assume these screws go through to tabs that are little rivet pop rivet things on this circuit board. You can see there's ignition on the actual board itself. You can read, like this thing says ignition, this one says sensor, and this one says ground. We also have a 2P positive, 2P negative. I do know I need to mess with the sensor and the ground because this isn't working. So we got P and ground. P is the sensor, and that's going to correlate to the wire on the driver's side. When you plug it in, it'll be this third on the bottom. So I'm going to go see what wire that is, and for ground, it grounds through the other. So if anything else on here works, which it does, so we know ground is basically good, as long as it has a good connection. Let's go ahead and open up this screw, let's see what it looks like. Now very well could be the actual circuit board on the speedometer. I took off the Speedo circuit board. It's just the 6 screws in the back, and I found up here between a couple of these terminals there was some built-up corrosion jumping across them all. You can see that the resin on this board is kind of cracking. It was underneath all that. It was the yellow stuff, so I scraped that all off. I'm gonna see if I put this back in, if that has any effect on how it functions. It actually got a little signal, look at that. Let's see what it's reading. You can click the auto button for it to auto sense. But there's nothing should be yet until the wheels turn. Nothing yet. That's a little bit of signal noise. So we're gonna switch it to drive. It's working. Let's see if I let off the brake. Give it a little bit of gas. Oh wait, that's the actual waveform.
That's what I'm saying. You weren't actually going. There we go.
It's a sine wave.
So yeah, it goes up to 5 volts, I think. 150 hertz.
A lot of noise.
Now we're at 1 volt. Before we were at like much less.
There's a bunch of noise at low speeds.
Yeah.
Coming from it.
But that shouldn't affect the gauges, because the gauge isn't moving right now.
So give it more. Yeah, you see how it peak to peak's getting bigger?
Yeah, it increases the voltage and frequency. Yeah, I mean, it's at 5 volts right now, peak to peak, which is 2.5 volt overall. So that sensor seems to be working.
It's sending a signal up here.
Yeah, and it's sending what I think is correct signal. So we're gonna try and duplicate that signal and send it to the dash. So the sensor seemed good. We're going to the gauges now, and I have to have the gauges plugged in while I send a signal through it. So I'm tapping onto the screws in the back right here, you can see. There's 2 of them. The sensor signal right here, and then the ground wraps to this screw. And then I'll attach my waveform generator to these ends of this wire and send a big signal through it to see if this gauge works and diagnose the rest of it. I'm thinking the gauge is bad.
So you're gonna plug everything else in and then just have those 2 leads.
Yeah, because it does need power, like power supply, outside of the sensor signal. So if you just send a sensor signal through it, nothing's gonna happen. You need the ignition power going to the dash. All right, so I got the ignition power turned on, and this tapped into the back of the dashboard, and you can see I have it set at 5 hertz base signal, 5% duty cycle at 2.3 volts, and I can increase this frequency, and you'll watch as I increase it, the speedometer goes up. Overall, I mean, maybe it's just a bad connection between the plug and this board. What I'm gonna do now is jump to the screws on the back of the board where I'm jumped right now, but from the output signal of the sensor, and see if that changes anything when it's in gear. All right, the last thing I showed was testing the dashboard, and I used this device. I want to talk about it just real quick because this is a hugely great investment. It's only 50 bucks on Amazon. It's a Z-Way 154 Pro. I was just looking for some type of oscilloscope and waveform generator and found this, and it actually worked really great. It was perfect for diagnosing this. So if you're looking to fix your issue with your Z31 or any dash or anything really with sensors involved, that's a solid investment. I'm not being paid to say that, I just really like it. So outside of that, that diagnosis told me that the dashboard actually works. It is not uncommon for those Z31 dashboard speedometer motors to give out, but this verified that it does work. Therefore, I'm thinking it actually was the sensor itself, the one on the transmission. And according to the manufacturer testing procedure, spinning it quickly by hand, it should read 0.5 volt AC. And I tested that with the multimeter. Now, when you can hook up a drill to the sensor and spin it faster than by hand, and it should, increase voltage and frequency. The one on the car did not. It actually went down. So something was really wrong with that one, although it did check out on the manufacturer spec. Now, I got one that's heavily used, but it's a different one, and I was told it works. So we're gonna test this one, and if this one actually does read out correct, we're gonna swap it out on the car and verify that it worked. And that should be the repair. I think I gave you enough information on this video to kind of diagnose exactly what the issue would be with your car if you have the same issue, and hopefully that's everything that solves it. So let's see if this actually works and figure it out. Now to hook up a drill to this, well, first things first, if you have the whole thing out as one piece, this is the part you spin by hand, and you'll be reading the output from these two wires, the black and the white, hooked up to your multimeter on AC voltage. It's important to get the AC voltage. Now, if you have it all apart like this and you want to hook it up to a drill, obviously a drill won't fit to this. You disconnect the two, you take out this spindle drive mechanism, and you can put this end into the sensor, the square end, and then the open end, or the circular end with the tab on it, you can hook up to the drill and read it from there. So let's get that set up real quick. And now I'll turn this on to AC voltage. That's the one with a little sine wave on it. And let's read. And just put that little key in one of the slots of the drill. Now, it's nice to have a variable speed drill so you can see the full output, but we'll start with a slow speed. It should read 0.5 volt. Oh, faster than already. So that's probably what, 300, 400 RPM, already reading almost 3 volts. 6 volts at a high speed, 7 volts. Yeah, so this one, compared to the other one, definitely works, because the other one would not go above 0.5 volt. So we are set with that, and we are gonna throw that on the car and test it out. Now real quick, before I throw that sensor in, I'm gonna clean it out with some electronics cleaner spray. That one that I had gotten, the new one-ish, it was filled with trans fluid, just like the one I took off. And that motor in there does not need any fluid. So we're gonna grab a little bit of electronic cleaner and spray in there. And then we're also gonna fix the wires on it. It looks like it was clipped once. That's probably a replacement sensor. We're gonna solder those wires back with a good connection and reseal it with rubber heat shrink. And that should be all good and sealed. Make sure there's just no fluid in there, no trans fluid that can start messing with all the components in there. All right, got everything back together. Now it's time to test to see if this speedometer sensor actually works. You can see the temperature gauge is off. I'm gonna have to pop that lens back off and reset it because I had to take that off when messing with the gauges. So It's important to, if you take those off, put power back to the entire dashboard system and let the needle rest in its neutral position before you put the needle back on. So on the old sensor, I tried to tear it apart to rebuild it, and these are actually like resin glued AC motors into the housing, and the housing breaks before you're even able to start and get to that motor. But it looks like there's no real way to get these anymore. You just have to get old used ones that still work, but they're probably going to start going bad and being almost impossible to find. But there's a lesson here. There's a lesson here. Don't always go specifically by the manufacturer specs. Follow your instinct and test everything as well as you can. That way you know for sure before digging into a more complex part of the car that that part might actually be good or bad. So in this instance, it was the simple, easy one to fix, but although it checked out by the manufacturer specs, it really wasn't good. So it's worth checking everything out double before digging in really hard. And good thing this actually fixed. So I hope this helped you guys. If you have any questions, let me know. I kind of know this whole speedometer system really well now. And yeah, thanks for watching.